everybody, and welcome back to the Legal Weekly Wine, where we discuss the week's hottest legal topics. Up today, we've got immigration, but in this episode, we are specifically discussing two Supreme Court cases that have come up through the ranks, one of which has gone back to the district court and now up through the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. So we've got Abrego Garcia, sorry on a pronunciation, Abrego Garcia, as well as the Venezuelans. So we've got one set of Venezuelans that's already in El Salvador. We've got another set that is currently being held in Texas. This is the one that we're talking about today. So this is the one that the Supreme Court has shockingly gotten into very, very quickly. We're going to talk about that, what it means, as well as the one for Garcia that started in Maryland and has come up through the court. So stay tuned with us as we break these two cases down, what's going on with the Supreme Court, what has been done after the Supreme Court's decisions, and what's coming next. I'm Virginia Tarani. I am the attorney for Tarani Law, LLC, because you never need a lawyer till you do. I operate in Maryland, doing work in Maryland, D.C., and Virginia. And I am the CEO of The Law Unscripted, which hosts this program, The Legal Weekly Wine. And I am joined by my co-host of The Legal Weekly Wine, Dr. John Vial, who is the Dean of the Honors College of Middle Tennessee State University. Welcome back.
Good to be here.
All right. Glad you're here. So we're actually taping in the morning. We're hoping you guys are hitting this either on your morning commute or at a happy hour where you can do that glass of wine that I usually like to do. But today I've got coffee. I've even got our mug, the allegedly This Is Coffee mug, which is on our website, thelawunscripted.com. So www.thelawunscripted.com. Go to merchandise. You can get one of these two in our purple color or a black, as well as some fun legal sayings on shirts and stuff like that. But Dr. Vial, I don't think you've got your mug this morning.
No, I just have some
just water.
Spring water.
All right, just some spring water. So you're hydrating. I'm caffeinating. And that's how we're going to start this. So if I'm a little bit hyper this morning, maybe there's an explanation, but maybe it'll make the show a little more fun. We'll see. And these long pauses, I tell you, Dr. Vial, we've done this long enough.
Yes. Okay. What am I supposed to say?
We have been podcasting. We've been doing this over 100 episodes. I think this is 107 or 108 now. So, we're somehow still getting in the groove, but we're glad that everybody has joined us, and sit back and brace for this exciting episode, because it definitely is exciting. I don't know about fun or happy, but certainly exciting in the terms of legal maneuvering and legal news. Go ahead, Dr. Vial. I know.
Let's not forget the death of the Pope.
Absolutely.
Highly symbolic, the day after Easter. The day after meeting J.D. Vance. I hope there's no connection there.
I know. And I was devastated because it was, he came out and spoke on Easter, and it seemed so hopeful. And I'm so glad he was able to address everyone on Easter, that he lived through Easter to see a new Resurrection Sunday. But he met J.D. Vance.
Virginia viewers particularly will remember that Stonewall Jackson, great hero of the Civil War, at least for Virginians, really wanted to die on a Sunday on the Lord. He was known for his pietism.
Interesting.
And did get his wish. And I guess the Pope died actually the day after Easter, but certainly in a fitting season. And, we need to remember our Jewish friends too. I believe Passover was actually a week ago.
Well, it started a week ago and ended also on Easter Sunday.
Yeah. But, and that's another sort of a couple of sad points this last week, the bombing of Governor Shapiro's house in Pennsylvania.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And then also the shooting on the campus of Florida State University. So
we've had a lot.
The world, some ways, has changed for the better, but there's still a lot of evil long after the Passover and long after the cross and the resurrection.
Absolutely. A lot of tragedy. So with those tragedies, we have these immigration, and I know we've done a lot of immigration, and honestly, I never thought we'd talk so much about immigration as a legal issue, at least one that would be in the news. But here we are in 2025, and it's the end of April, and that's exactly what's in the news. And I will say it's quite alarming and disturbing to
And
me.
let's link this back to what we just talked about.
Yes.
Um, to the I suppose of recent popes, the pope who has had the most political influence has been Pope Paul II.
John Paul, right.
I'm sorry, yeah, John Paul II. I'm always reminded that during World or at the end of World War II, I don't know if it was Truman or Roosevelt, but one of the American presidents and Churchill and Stalin were meeting together, and they were basically carving up, who was going to get what at the end of the war. And one of them said, well, Poland has got to be on the Western side because they're Roman Catholic. And Stalin reputedly said, well, how many divisions does he have? Meaning what, does he doesn't have any military force, so he shouldn't have any say. But, really the movement for East European independence of the Soviet Union was basically cradled in Poland. I mean, there was
Mm,
elsewhere, Germany as well. But the spiritual power turned out in the end to be just as significant as the boots on the ground that Stalin had
absolutely.
put so much emphasis on.
Absolutely.
But to go then to continue just a minute,
Mhm.
uh, Pope Francis, is two political things that he's done. One is he has he has been very sympathetic to the concerns over the environment.
Right.
He has accepted global warming, and I don't know that the other popes did or did not, but he certainly has emphasized it and care for the environment. It goes all the way back to tending the garden in the book of Genesis.
Right.
But his other main emphasis has been, a concern for the poor and the downtrodden, and particularly the immigrants. And I guess I didn't realize it till I was watching the news this morning. But he himself, of course, was born in Argentina, but he was the son of immigrants,
Mm.
and so he was the one, perhaps during I don't remember if it was, I think it was the end of the Obama administration when Trump first ran for president, that he was saying we needed to build bridges rather than walls.
Yeah.
And it'd be interesting, there's been I'm not a Catholic, so I'm not as familiar with it as others, but I read enough to know that there's been a fair amount of dissent among conservative Catholics in the United States, including J.D. Vance, which is basically this isn't any matter for the Pope to be concerned about it. But from his perspective, that's the heart of the gospel, is not, uh, not the goal that you see when you go to St. Peter's Square,
Right.
but it's the washing of the feet of the prisoners, uh, the care for the stranger among you. So it'll be
Right. Well,
interesting.
isn't there even a verse of, care for the widows and orphans and the aliens, for you were once aliens too?
Absolutely. I mean, the whole
Mhm.
Jewish experience, which is a prelude to the Christian experience, is that of being strangers in another land, and the obligation to defend the helpless. And again, these often included the foreigners who were among them.
Right. So let's talk about some foreigners. Let's talk about Garcia first.
Okay.
And as I understand this, I'm going to give a very brief background. This is a man in Maryland who has been here for over a decade and has many children. He's married, has a wife here. And in 2019, there was at least a hearing to decide that there was a strong potential that if he were deported back to, and I believe it is El
It
Salvador,
is, yes.
that he would face imminent violence and possible death as a result of his connections there and whatever was happening. So he was granted some kind of immunity. And
Asylum, I believe, yeah.
right now, I don't know if it was permanent or temporary. And so I'm not necessarily ruling on that. But what I do understand is that he was taken and deported, maybe even by himself, to the El Salvadorian prison. That's been at such a hot topic where these Venezuelans have been deported. Over approximately 300 have already been deported, and he was taken and deported there. And then the Trump administration has said, oops, it was a clerical error. And they've admitted that it was an administrative error, that he was deported to El Salvador based on this prior ruling, that they had basically violated this prior ruling in 2019 and in error had taken him to this El Salvadorian.
Well, they're alleging that he's a gang member, and apparently a lot of people are being, wash your tattoos or cover them up,
Get
because
them up. Yeah.
I mean, he literally, as I understand it, has a tattoo that involves the birth of Jesus, and they're interpreting it as a gang symbol.
And I don't know that it is, but I don't know that it's not. And from my understanding, there was some evidence, but it was not conclusive. And they couldn't declare that he was a gang member. And even the police officer who testified has now been completely discredited. That he was, from what I remember reading, that he actually had been seen to have perjured himself. He was discredited. He was taken off the force. And now there's a question of, was he even lying for this? So there's all of these questions of whatever his representations as to whether Garcia was a gang member or not are fully in question. And it wasn't fully decided. There is still some controversy, but nonetheless, the administration has still agreed that this is an error. And this
and they're now saying it's an incorrectable error, that we sent him there. They have custody. We can't do anything about it, which is ridiculous. We're the ones apparently paying to have him locked up. I mean, imagine taking a client to court and the evidence is, as you suggest, well, there's some evidence here and some there. What's the presumption in America? The presumption is a presumption of innocent until proven guilty. And as the Supreme Court pointed out, or at least one of the decisions that I read on this, if the government is so sure that he's guilty, then they have nothing to worry about. Bring him back, let him bring out the evidence in court under oath, and if you can prove it, send him on.
But even if they send him on, my question is, why to a prison? Is if he's deported, why can't he just be deported back to the country? Why if he's not in prison here, especially, why would he have to go to a prison there?
The reason is, if you lived through, and I did not, the Stalin era, but they used to have what were called show trials. They would take people that Stalin thought were his enemies, and he was extremely paranoid, so he thought it was practically everybody. You'd parade him before a kangaroo court, convict him, and execute him. It's showmanship. The American people were told that he's going to deport immigrants, and by golly, he's doing it.
There's a difference from deporting and imprisoning and deporting.
I'm not supporting it. I'm just saying.
Right. But essentially what we're doing, and this is the most shocking thing to me, is yes, we're deporting. Okay, we're getting rid of, if they're gang members, and we have the right to deport them, if they're gang members and illegal, and we have the right to deport them. First of all, like you're saying, there's due process. Let it go through the system, let it play out through the system, and then deport them. But if we deport them, why are we imprisoning them? So we're finding them guilty of something because we're putting them in prison. That's where we're sending them. We're not just sending them back to the country to be released.
Well, and I mean, the other dicey thing about this, and I think at least the Supreme Court has not, I'm not sure they definitively ruled on this, but the language of the law under which he's being deported, the Alien Enemies Act, is
well, that's not his, that's the Venezuelans, right? There are two different pieces here. I think that's the one where the Venezuelans are being taken out. But is he also fitting under this, or is it separate?
I'm not sure. There seems to be some ambiguity as I read it as to, what they're doing. But to go to, maybe we'll make the transition when we get to the other one. The Alien Enemies Act applied to times of war.
Right.
And this is not with a foreign country, and we're not at war with El Salvador. We're not at war
Or
with
Venezuela.
Venezuela. And the other was invasion. And I suppose one can argue that immigration constitutes an invasion. But it seems it's certainly not the kind of classical invasion one would have envisioned. I mean, the Native Americans could have made a better argument against invasion than we're making right now.
Absolutely. We show up with ships and guns, and yeah. So Garcia, it got up to the Supreme Court.
Right.
And he's been in El Salvador. He's been in this prison. Again, why he's imprisoned, I don't know.
And
but he's in prison there.
Different prison right now.
Well, he is now, but he wasn't. He was first.
He was with all the gang members, one of the most notorious prisons in the world outside of China, probably.
Exactly. So then we get into the idea, and we'll come back to this, of the Eighth Amendment of cruel and unusual punishment. Right. That's what's going off in my head, and nobody seems to have mentioned this, is not only do we have due process, but we also have the Eighth Amendment, which occurs to people who were here. But anyway, so we've got him there. It goes up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court makes a unanimous decision that, as I understand it, but Dr. Weil, correct me, a unanimous decision that the government has to, quote, facilitate
his
Garcia's return.
Right, in order that he get due process. And essentially, the government says, facilitate, habilitate, what does that mean? We really can't do anything about it now.
Well, and not only that, and not only did they say that, but Trump and the El Salvadorian president are sitting in the same room in a press conference where Trump says, well, we'll take him back if you're going to let him out. And he smiles, and the president says, well, no. And he said, well, okay. There's this wink, wink, right? That the tweet did when it came out from the El Salvadorian president saying, oops, too late, winky face, is the same kind of thing.
Secretary of State Rubio retweeted that.
Right. So we've already got him there. It is shameful. We've already got him.
Right. And what's more, well, it's hard. Individual injustice is always shameful, but what this is bringing to light is it's not at all clear whether the president is willing to follow the law.
Exactly.
The law, the court when the court says facilitate, he seems to have been saying, well, we've already done what we can, which is nothing. Forget it. And we have a good chance right now that the court is going to find the government in contempt.
Yes, and this is with Judge Boasberg.
Right. And typically the way that works is if the court finds somebody in contempt, then the Justice Department should pursue it.
Correct.
Which clearly the Trump administration seems unlikely to do.
Why would they?
Apparently there is an alternative where the court can itself appoint someone to carry out this task apart from the Justice Department. And there we would have one of these, head-to-head conflicts between court says one thing and the president reviews. Right. So far the president seems to be more trying to evade direct confrontation, well, it's out of my hands, or, not, well, I won't do it. It's like, well, I can't do it, or, things are beyond me.
I can't. He's the one not letting the guy out.
Right. But that's very unpersuasive. I mean, the president of the most powerful nation in the world, who has paid for them to incarcerate people, doesn't have any control of it after that. I mean,
Right.
that's very, very scary.
Right. And that's what's happening. So this went back, the Supreme Court sent it back to the lower courts. And this is Judge Paula Xinis. And this is the Maryland federal court where I am. I'm just down the road. And so she is saying, you have to give an explanation. You have to show facts, Trump administration, of what you've done to facilitate his return. And the Trump administration said basically this is, well, we've told him, I don't know if they even said we've asked, but they've told him he can come back. And the president saying, the Salvadorian president saying, no, he can't come back. So that's it. And now that's gone up to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, right, which is this Virginia, Maryland jurisdiction, yes, still in my jurisdiction. And this is your favorite ruling here. We've got Judge Wilkinson.
J. Harvey Wilkinson was a fixture at University of Virginia when I was in graduate school there. He had actually taken time, as I understand it, off from law school to run for public office. He wasn't elected to that. He went back, got his law degree at UVA, I believe taught there for a while, subsequently became a federal judge. A deeply conservative individual.
He was appointed by Reagan.
Absolutely. He was old-fashioned conservatism, I think, at its best. And he has written really an amazing decision for the Fourth Circuit. He was joined by two others, typically
unanimous.
Yeah,
it was a unanimous opinion.
Three judge courts, and among them, in response to this facilitate, he says the plain and active meaning of the word cannot be diluted by its constriction, as the government will have it to a narrow term of art. We are not bound in this context by a definition crafted by an administrative agency and contained in a mere policy directive. It's clear that, according to him, that the Supreme Court has ruled that this man should be released from custody in El Salvador. And he basically, what's interesting is it's very powerful. It's very short, by the way. It's only a 7-page decision. But he packs a semester's worth of constitutional law in here.
He calls it an incipient crisis.
He does.
He's talking a lot about the branches, like you and I have been talking about, right, of the conflict between the branches of government, the executive and the judiciary. And in this, he even says the basic differences between the branches mandate a serious effort of mutual respect. Right. The respect that courts must accord the executive must be reciprocated by the executive's respect for the courts. And then he even goes on, he says the administration's assertions, and this is we facilitated by saying he can come back and they've just refused, says, quote, it should be shocking not only to judges, but to the intuitive sense of liberty that Americans far removed from courthouses still hold dear.
And the part that I like the best, we do need to remember, now, again, there's a bit of theater involved here.
Sure.
But the president indicated at one point, well, why stop at people who are just resident aliens? Maybe, there's some citizens we ought to deport.
Right.
He's probably thinking of Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi.
Well, but they've even said that. How many different administrators in the government have said, well, that person needs to be deported, and it's a citizen. We've got even actresses they've been quoting of we should deport her. And it's not funny.
Let me read what he says. If today the executive claims the right to deport without due process and in disregard of court orders, what assurances will there be tomorrow that it will not deport American citizens and then disclaim responsibility to bring them home? And
Right.
what assurance shall there be that the executive will not train its broad discretionary power upon political enemies?
Absolutely.
So this is the classical slippery slope.
Yeah.
But it's not, he's not just making it up. I
No.
mean, we have words from the president himself, which again may be theatrical, but they're still scary.
Absolutely. And it's becoming, I mean, we've got the Florida case where they did hold an American citizen. The Florida ICE agents detained, an
Yes,
American on
they
an
did let him
ICE
out, but yeah,
hold. They did let
yeah,
him out, but he's waving his birth certificate around. And it took how long for him to be
yeah,
released? And
like
at what
48 hours. Yeah.
cry? And then, the administration seems to be taking an approach of, well, let's get them out and then say, oopsie, and we can't do anything there. So if we just get them out of the country first, now this goes into the new Supreme Court case. So we've got another set of Venezuelans, allegedly gang
Right.
members, who have been sitting in a Texas jail, who have been detained, who the government is trying to send to the El Salvadorian prison. So again, I don't know what crime they're imprisoning them for. I understand holding for deportation. I do get that.
Good.
I do get that these could be potentially very scary and violent people, but we don't know because we haven't gone through due process to determine if they are.
And let me give a little caution here. If anybody looks this up, it's called A period R period P period, which looks like American
A.A.R.P.
pronunciation of it, but it's not. These are the initials of one of the plaintiffs, and it's against Trump. So A.A.R.P versus Donald J. Trump.
Right. And this is the one where they're trying to take another set of Venezuelans
Right.
out of the country, and it went up quickly.
It
It was
did, and
lightning fast.
it did, and it's a 7-2 decision. What's fascinating about it, and actually the court's decision is fairly long for being so quick.
And this is the US Supreme
Right,
Court. This has
right,
already gotten to the US Supreme Court, and it's a 7-2 decision
right,
by the Supreme Court to hold them here, to
right.
not
And
deport them yet.
what's
And this is,
fascinating is we knew that there were two justices dissenting, Alito and Thomas,
yes,
who are on the conservative side of the court. Um, but we got the written dissent by Alito a couple days later. And what's fascinating is he's basically saying, I don't understand why we did this. Why did we do this in the middle of the night? What was the hurry? Well,
what's the exigent circumstances?
they were loading them onto buses and giving them something, most of them in English, which they might not have even been able to understand, telling them they were about to be deported. And
Well,
Alito
they got
was
almost to the airport or into the gates of the
right,
airport with the buses
right.
and were then turned
Right.
around.
And this is where the two cases fit together. We know that in the previous case, right, the judge had orally from the bench said, don't send them.
Yes.
And I misunderstood this, I believe, in one of our last broadcasts, because I was sympathetic to people who said, well, it's not the right of a judge to turn a plane around in the middle of a flight. There might be danger there. But my understanding now is that what he said is that if they're flying down there, you do not have the power to transfer them to El
Off the
Salvadorian
train,
authorities. You
off the
have to
plane.
send them back. And the reason that Alito's dissent doesn't make any sense to me is this is the context of this one. We
Yes.
already know they probably violated a judge's order, transferred them, and they're about ready to do the same thing again. And Alito is saying, what's the hurry? Well, the hurry is due process, cruel and
Yes.
unusual, add whatever they are. This is behavior that now actually I saw a poll yesterday. Majority of the American people think everybody's entitled to due process.
Yes.
There's a fair plurality maybe of Republicans who think otherwise. But we had another president back in 1937 who took a similar attitude toward the Supreme Court. After, after the court began invalidating New Deal programs, Roosevelt said,
The beloved Roosevelt.
yeah, we are going to one of the most popular presidents in American history. He didn't slide in like Trump did with a minority, just a bare majority of the popular vote. He had a mandate, but the court, the Congress, and eventually the American people said, we value the neutrality. Yes, the Supreme Court is a political body. You have input, Senate has input, but if we're going to maintain the rule of law, we need a neutral arbitrator between the president's will and arbitrary actions. And I really think that Trump is pressing up against a similar situation here, and probably is overestimating his own ability to do this. But we will see.
I hope so. Yeah, and some of this, it's interesting. So this is with the Alien Enemies Act that they're trying to deport these particular Venezuelans, which is the first thing that they claimed. So the specific question before the Supreme Court on this case is whether they can deport under this Alien Enemies Act. And ultimately, it's really fascinating how quickly this has gone. I've never seen it in my lifetime. And Dr. Weil, you've been studying constitutional law for longer. Have you seen such a quick turnaround in the Supreme Court getting involved and doing it from a Friday night into a Saturday?
I believe in the 2000 election, there was something. I mean, it was a little bit different issue, but it was very clear they had to make a decision by X date, or the votes were going to be counted in a certain way, or they were not. So it's not completely. And I believe the steel seizure case that we mentioned, on other, where Truman tried to seize the steel mills during the Korean War, I believe that was expedited to the Supreme Court. So and again, in normal circumstances, I might agree with Alito that it's very unusual to have a night session of the court. On the other hand, the background they're facing is we have a president who, once they get off American soil, seems to wash his hands of them. So I think it was an appropriate action for them to take.
And
it's going to be a fascinating couple months here, seeing how this plays out.
Exactly. And this is the lawsuit that went up for the Venezuelans has said, quote, without this court's intervention, dozens or hundreds of proposed class members may be removed to a possible life sentence in El Salvador with no real opportunity to contest their designation or removal. So the Supreme Court is not saying they can't be removed. That's not what they're saying. They are saying they cannot yet be removed based on their ruling. They need to decide. And what I think their side is saying is due process. We have to go through due process to decide whether we can deport them under this act, and if so, where they go.
Right. And if due process is eroded for non-citizens, it can be eroded for citizens.
Absolutely.
This is that slippery slope that we talked about.
If it's not you, wait a minute, it's me.
Right.
There's so much, and this is the government's response. So the Trump, in his inaugural address, pledged to eliminate the presence of all foreign gangs. But what they're saying on the Trump administration is, look, we've got to get rid of the gang members. We have to. This is a security threat. But what if it's not gang members?
Right.
What's next if it's not the gang members or those who have been and here's the other and I'm getting worked up. I apologize. I was a prosecutor. I was a state prosecutor in Virginia. I was one of the assistant Commonwealth's attorneys in 2 different jurisdictions for a while. And I was on the drugs, guns, and gangs team. Okay. I prosecuted gang members. I prosecuted murderers. I was in these trials. I prosecuted one of the worst cases I ever participated in as a prosecutor, as any attorney, was the horrendous rape, sodomy, and attempted murder of a U.S. citizen who was in the military, who just was happening to walk home at night. And she was pulled off the street by an illegal immigrant. And she was beaten half to death. They thought she was going to die. He thought she was dead. He buried her in a shallow grave on the side of the road after sodomizing and raping her. And she runs out into the middle of the street half naked to get help. And one of the saddest quotes I've ever heard in court, and I cried, as the prosecutor, I cried, was she said, "I didn't know if I was running out into the road so I would get hit and killed, or if I actually wanted help." And we convicted him, and he was sentenced to life in prison. But even looking at that case, I know he has an ICE detainer where if he ever got out, he would be deported. But I would still hope, even for him, that there would be some kind of due process through the normal immigration courts as to what happens to him and where he goes.
So before Donald Trump was elected president, there was it a rape, I believe, in Central Park, where 5 people were accused. If I understand it, he put out
Central Park 5.
Right. He put out a full ad in one of the newspapers saying, we got to have justice. It's subsequently been revealed they're not in jail because they were innocent. They were not the ones who did it. So,
Right.
there are cases of mistaken identity.
Yes.
And I mean, I think just think if not everybody will agree with this, but if you look at the ham-handed way that people are being fired right now from governmental agencies, and you're looking at what's been classified as fraud, waste, and abuse when it comes to things like, predicting the weather and, scientific research and all of this, do you have faith that an accusation brought by one of these people is necessarily the true? I certainly
Right.
don't have any confidence in that.
Right.
I would want somebody between an accusation like that and a deportation or a conviction.
Exactly. And
That's what the law is all about.
yes, there's a level of proof required. And in my case that I'm talking about, there was proof beyond a reasonable doubt he was convicted. But even he has a different set of rights in immigration courts, different set of standards. Even for my gang cases that I did, we would have to prove a crime or the membership of a gang. And if we could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that element, that they were the member of a gang, then they couldn't be classified as a member of a gang. In the Garcia case, we've got a guy who has no criminal convictions on his record. And he's now being labeled as a gang member and put in a prison, and he's not even been proven to be a criminal.
And to be absolutely clear, it's always a possibility that there is evidence that we don't know.
Oh, sure.
But if there is,
Bring
it to court. And
Bring
people, give your testimony under oath, subject to
Absolutely.
cross-examination.
Absolutely.
So, we're not arguing, at least I don't think we are, to keep gang members, particularly violent criminals in the United States. But, we have something similar, and we're getting a little off topic, but, we have people at the university where I teach and many others right now who have been told for no reason other than apparently, sometimes we don't even know,
Right.
but some of the cases that I know from other schools, they were picked up for DUI and not convicted, or they were accused of shoplifting. I don't say the convicted,
charged or accused,
but
right?
the kind of things that if it happened to an ordinary citizen, you get a slap on the hand, hopefully, and not do it again, and that would be it. But we're creating a climate of fear.
Yes.
I think the most outrageous case I've heard is the person who is going actually to take his citizenship test.
Yes.
And is pull out of the proceedings to be deported. This is, and what the concern here, not only is it unjust, but it means people, if you're one of those citizens and you're a victim, somebody has broken into your house
Yes.
or, robbed you or whatever, you're going to be afraid to go to the police for fear that instead of being treated like the victim, you're going to be treated like the perpetrator.
Exactly.
This is, well, you could say, well, who cares, something, but the person who robbed that person may be robbing a citizen the next day. So
Exactly.
this is not a good situation.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the most shocking and upsetting things that the Trump administration has put out is the statement of, you're caring more for a gang member than for U.S. citizens. Well,
That's
no,
outrageous.
that's not what this is. It's not that we care more for an alleged gang member or an actual gang member than a U.S. citizen.
I mean,
It's that we
okay,
care about the process.
we have a president who is a convicted felon. He's
Yes.
actually been convicted.
Convicted.
We've still given him due process. We have a president who has been twice impeached. Now, he wasn't convicted.
Correct.
He was given due process under the Constitution. And if it's good for him, it ought to be good for other people as well.
Right. Right. Oh, goodness. Well, all of these is, honestly, it sounds like so little, but I know it's so much is to pray, right? And do what we can. As an attorney, I
Well,
feel even more responsibility right now.
lawyers have a particular responsibility to uphold the law, but
Yes.
so do citizens. And I know you don't want to talk about it during this session, so you can cut me off if you want. But people I know tomorrow are going to be very interested in a case that's coming out of Montgomery County, Maryland,
Yes. So much is
involving.
happening in Maryland.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And your
I'm
senator,
here.
we didn't mention that, but one
Yes.
of your senators actually went down to El Salvador, and
I'm
one of the
really proud of him.
one of
Honestly,
the
I'm
more
pleased.
amusing things was the El Salvadorian president's charge that they were drinking martinis, and apparently while he was talking, they came and set martinis down in front of him. And he pointed out that if you look closely, you'll see that there's no mark where either of them raised it to their lips. You still have the sugar or the salt around the top.
Yeah.
But these are fairly interesting times. And again, this case tomorrow, I've seen very passionate views on both sides of the issue. It pits parental rights, religious rights against what public schools think are best, or at least this one does. But there's also an element of due process there, because my understanding is when these books were adopted as part of the curriculum, they were adopted with a provision that parents would be able to withdraw their children from that, and then they changed their mind on it. So it'll be a very fascinating case to watch.
It will be. And we'll do an episode on that. So stay tuned with us for another episode later this week or into next week, where we do discuss the Maryland case surrounding the LGBTQ plus rights and what is put into public schools or not. That is the Maryland case. So we're going to hit that. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day if you possibly can after our broadcast there. We're going to try, maybe I go to wine next. This coffee has definitely not been soothing. But anyway, everybody do what you can on either side. Have an opinion, form an opinion, review the facts. This is how democracy works, is that we are able to express and convey and act on our opinions within the manner and reasonableness of law. So go to www.thelawunscripted.com for bar-related materials for the 8 core subjects of law school, as well as this podcast and the Law Unscripted podcast. Check out our merchandise, and we will catch you next time on the Legal Weekly Wine.